Welcome to the September 13th meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. We're going to do things just a tad differently in this section. For those of you who are having a good day, raise your right hand. Now, check your neighbors. Did everybody do the right hand and not the left? Okay. Now put the left hand up there. Now stretch. All right. That is now the physical activity part of Rotary. Now, what I would ask is, today we've got a very soft-spoken person who's doing the invocation. So if everyone would be quiet and listen very carefully. The soft-spoken person is Barbara Sexton Smith.
One. In 1967, as President Johnson was signing the Public Broadcasting Act, he said these very words: "While we work every day to produce new goods and to create new wealth, we want most of all to enrich man's spirit." And soon after, here in the Commonwealth, in September of 1968, Kentucky Educational Television, KET, was established as part of Kentucky's quest for excellence in education, recognizing the importance of expanding learning opportunities for all Kentuckians, breaking down economic and geographic barriers from the hills of East Kentucky to the flatlands of West Kentucky and our great cities. Over these 50 years, KET has grown into one of the largest and most respected public broadcasting networks in America. I'm honored to introduce today KET's Public Affairs Managing Director, Renee Shaw. Renee's bio was printed in our Sparks newsletter, so I won't go into a whole lot of detail there, but just want to share a few things. She has multiple degrees from Western Kentucky University, which Barbara was talking about Western just a moment ago. And of course, Emma, we're so glad to have you here too with us today. I was a part of the group that selected her to represent our district, so we're so glad to have you, Emma. Renee has several degrees, as I mentioned, and numerous awards for her work. She's the managing producer overseeing KET's Public Affairs Division, and under her leadership provides extensive coverage of the Kentucky General Assembly and helps us all demystify the issues and breaking it all down on the issues that impact each of us as Kentuckians. Renee serves as host of Kentucky Tonight, Special Forums, and the Minority Affairs series that she hosts, Connections. In fact, just a few minutes ago, she had Dr. Neely Bendapudi, right? Our new president of U of L in our studio. She was interviewing her and sitting down and having a great conversation. So proud to work with Renee. She makes it look so easy, and the reason why is she pours in hours and hours of research and dedication so it looks so seamless, but she's got to be the hardest working professional in the business. So I just want to welcome to the podium my coworker and dear friend, Renee Shaw.
Well, thank you, Julie, for that very warm introduction. I think a lot of Julie. She does a lot of work for KET behind the scenes, and she's our unsung hero and enables me to do what I do. So I appreciate you, Julie, for all the support you show me personally and to our agency. And to the Western folks, I'm so glad and proud of you. I do have a few degrees from Western, and I keep in contact with them frequently. And so if I had a red towel, I'd wave it, because I certainly believe in Western Kentucky University. It's a fantastic institution, and you will have those connections for the remainder of your lifetime. I'm wearing cardinal colors today because I interviewed the president, but I do have the red on for Western, so it could go both ways, right? I'm very delighted to be here to speak with you today. I'm not going to talk politics, actually. I'm going to talk about education, because we at KET are celebrating 50 years of excellence, and we started off with that mission of education, first and foremost, and that is our middle name. 50 years, you could say that KET is at midlife without the crisis, thank goodness. We are golden, certainly, and we have a gold track record to prove all of our great work with education since that switch was flipped about 50 years ago with Lynn Press and Governor Louis Nunn. Before I go any further, I'd just like to show a brief video about some of the work in education that KET has done. Roll tape.
This ceremony, in reality, Kentucky Educational Television signed on the air, and the citizens of Kentucky were connected like never before. For the first time, through the power of television, learners across the state had equal access to the same high-quality instructional resources. This was KET's mission. From early productions like Universe and I, and the first GED series program designed to prepare you for reception of the GED exam, to college telecourses, and interactive high school distance learning classes, KET has harnessed evolving technologies to best serve the needs of educators and learners. Today, KET has become a nationally recognized leader in the production of instructional series, and KET resources are used in every Kentucky classroom.
So as the saying goes, we've come a long way, baby, in the 50 years since 1968. When we started off, it was just one channel with a limited amount of time on each day, and that was just during the school hours because the service was to serve the schools with content that they couldn't get anywhere else and to equalize the access to that content. Access has been the driving force and the imperative of KET. First, it started to making sure that educators across Kentucky were connected to the same quality content in the classroom. And we're continuing that with the digital platforms that are ever evolving in every Kentucky school. And we're building on that legacy of public broadcasting and delivering PBS Kids, the #1 educational brand for children, through the TV screen, through their smart devices, and even through community-based programs. For me, the word that's most synonymous with KET is trust, not just in our public affairs, which is my affinity, but it's trust with our education deliverables. KET PBS is the gold standard in school readiness, nurturing not just the academics of reading and math, but also looking at the social and emotional well-being of our children. If ever there was a time when that focus was critical, that time is now. We know that all of this work is working because 74% of the parents surveyed about the impact of educational networks say their child exhibits more positive behaviors after they've engaged in PBS Kids. So we know that KET's educational content is making a positive impact on Kentucky children. We all know that the stats tell us that only about 50% of the state's children enter kindergarten prepared for school. And KET's tried to leverage that by engaging eyeball to eyeball with educators and community groups, working to improve those numbers and deliver instructional content to get our future leaders on the right track. Programs like the First Five that our educational team is involved in, it's grounded in the understanding that the brain undergoes its most rapid development in the first 3 years of life, and 90% of a child's brain develops before age 5. So reading and talking and playing from cradle to kindergarten are critical in building children's brains, their language, and their vocabulary. Here in Louisville, just in last May, KET's early childhood team worked with the community partner Neighborhood House to host a 4-week play and learn session for families with younger children ages 3 through 5. Each session combined story time and games and hands-on activities to make learning about science simple for children and their families. Perhaps the most entertaining activity was watching the children with the weather maps and playing meteorologist Gene West, and many of them thinking they could have a future career as a weather person or a meteorologist. And some of them just might. There was a 3-year-old who remarked that, "I know all about the weather because a tree fell down because of the snow." And so that early interaction is so critical for children at those early ages. All of you in this room likely know that early childhood development is, in some states, a barometer for building prisons. And if you evaluate the 3rd grade reading levels of children, some states look at those reading levels and determine how many prisons to build. So if kids from all backgrounds and strata aren't engaged in learning now, then we all definitely will pay for it later. Now, I can personally testify to the strength of PBS. I come from a rural town on the Tennessee-Kentucky border, and back then in 1970-something, you had 2 or 3 channels, and you had an antenna that you had to hold your leg up in your arm, and you had the aluminum foil. And we watched Nashville Public Television, and my mother was a stay-at-home mother. And where I come from, there was no such thing as a formal early childhood development center. That was a lot of syllables for Portland, Tennessee gal, right? We didn't have that. What I had was a mother who had a high school education but wanted me to go further. So in the morning, every morning, we would get up, we'd say our prayers, we'd eat breakfast, and we'd turn it on PBS. And we would watch Electric Company, we would watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, we would watch Sesame Street, and we would dance. And I learned so much, not just my numbers and my letters, but I lived in a very homogenous community where I didn't see many people who looked like me. But when I turned on Sesame Street, I saw every color of the rainbow. And I thought, I had this conversation with President Bendapudi earlier about you can't be what you don't see. So in my community, I didn't see what I could be, but when I turned on PBS, I could see just that. And I knew, even at that early age, that's where I want to be. Somewhere in that system, inspiring another little girl from a rural community who feels isolated and that there's no trajectory, that there is hope. So the proof is in the numbers, other than just an anecdote about how the impact of KET can be felt. In fiscal year 17, KET enrolled more than 2,200 preschool teachers and child care workers in the KET Child Care Training Program for state licensing requirements. We offered nearly 61 early childhood online courses and issued more than 2,600 certificates. We provided 108 courses and training events to thousands of child care workers and parents that impact directly 72,000 kids. Those numbers show just how golden KET is to so many, with real impacts, not just in terms of stats, but in terms of lives changed and improved. It's only at those early stages of learning that a lifelong pursuit of knowledge is ignited and rooted, and that's part of KET's educational services that we take to heart. Being an agency of middle age, we know that our journey towards wisdom is a never-ending one. Today's rigorous and high-skilled workforce requires all of us to be sharper, more efficient, to be faster, and adult education is just as important to KET as K through 12 or K through 16. And this is where KET's connection to the business community comes in. How we interface with business partners and industries to build a better workforce and stronger communities. Back in 2000, you may remember that KET produced a highly utilized award-winning series called Workplace Essential Skills. And many of you in this room right now may say to yourself, well, I may struggle with finding workers that are skilled, who can show up on time, who can be drug-free, who can do all of those things in the workplace and the etiquette that's required. So that program produced 20 years ago, of course that's outdated now and antiquated. But we recognize those shifts in the currents in the labor market, and we're in the process of updating that content. So that's forthcoming. Those soft skills, all of those things that can help us build a stronger workforce. And that updated series is not just a tool for employers, but employees. And that's not all. KET is working with the Division of Workforce Investment to produce a series of videos and websites that details what's involved in high-demand jobs. If you want to be a welder, well, what does that mean? What skills are required? How much training does that take? Oftentimes we say we want people to do jobs, but we don't really know, and they don't know what those jobs are and what they require. So we talk about the need for critical qualified workers in those 5 key sectors of the economy: the construction and trades, advanced manufacturing, transportation and logistics, business and IT, and health services. But what does that all mean, and what is all available? So KET is now working on a series of videos to drill down, to be relatable to people, to explain what options are ahead of them. KET's Public Affairs Division, which I'm very blessed to lead, has a role in building tomorrow's workforce today, along with providing analysis of legislation and policies, which is one of my favorite things to do. Also actually having community forums where we bring in groups very similar with people of your interests to talk about how we can move the workforce forward. And we're having, in 2 weeks, a town hall style format at our studios in Lexington to bring together educators to talk about how K through 12 can be more involved in shaping the workforce for tomorrow. and that will air in October. So I hope you'll check your local listings for that airtime. Our other broadcast programs, we've highlighted great work, as Julie has said, from east to west. I've had the pleasure of interacting with the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative that's getting kids thinking about being entrepreneurs, engineers, builders through a project-based learning collaborative where the students build tiny houses. And in fact, this past spring, they built several tiny houses that were going for anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 that they were selling, that were accessible to anyone of any physical ability. It was a student-led, student-produced project from start to finish. The engineering, the development, the building, all done by students, and using the technology forces to help them with that. Partnerships with the Kentucky Adult Education, we help folks get a GED, and because of life, many people didn't have a chance to finish high school at the time. Our Fast Forward test preparation learning system has helped a young woman by the name of Amanda. Amanda suffered from ADHD and dyslexia. She dropped out of high school. Her mother died. She turned to drugs and alcohol. Then she got divorced. Then she went to jail. You see how all of this happens. And then finally, she lost custody of her child. But thank goodness, Amanda's story doesn't end there. She turned to the Lyon County Adult Learning Center and got back on track. And KET was the conduit, and the programs that we offer were the conduit to a new life for Amanda, where she could realize her full potential. Amanda's story demonstrates our connectedness to communities in the course of our educational offerings, and our work ranging from cultural experiences to bringing opera to your living room, to our authors forums and great conversations where you engage and hear from all high clout folks about their work. That Technicolor journey that we take you when we take you through the national and the state parks, all of that to bring Kentucky to your home and remind us why we all have decided to call Kentucky home. Oddly enough, that's what we do in the Public Affairs Division. You would think that maybe that doesn't coincide, but in fact it does. We try, and the subtext of our work is to discuss the weighty and complex issues of our time, looking for solutions. Solutions-based journalism is a paradigm that I'm trying to adopt in all of our work, that there's lots of talk about the problems, whether that's the opioid addiction or a lack of a skilled labor force. But there are lots of great innovation around each of those issues. What's happening in the drug treatment field? What are the collaborations in community? My goal is always to ascend us to higher ground and to heighten our level of conversation, with civility always being the center stone. But perhaps, as Julie alluded to, the legislative coverage in Kentucky Tonight, those things are my heart, but my soul is the Connections program, which is really a community-based program. And this is where the intersection of policies and programs collide. I remember Hassan Davis, who may be a familiar name to you. Hassan Davis was from Berea. He was a juvenile delinquent, and as were many of his brothers and cousins, those who actually lived beyond their teenage years. He buried more than he had in his household. He got on a wrong path. He turned to drugs and to gang-banging activity, but there was a teacher who intercepted and got him back on the right track. That lasted for a little bit. He was expelled from school a couple of times, but he finally graduated, went to college, same thing, same cycle, got off track, got expelled from Berea, but eventually it clicked with him that if I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm gonna get what the others got. So I've got to change my life. So what did he do? He got a GED, and then he went on to get his JD, and then his PhD, and the guy who was a juvenile delinquent went to being the Commissioner of Juvenile Justice here in Kentucky for a short time under the Beshear administration. Now that story, which you can read in his book called Written Off, is a real person. And that's why he wrote the book called Written Off, because so many of us want to throw away people who we say, oh, there's no way they can ever be redeemed. Hassan Davis is proof that no one is beyond redemption. Rosalind Akins is another one. Now, she happens to be the wife of my pastor back in Lexington, Reverend Akins. Rosalind Akins is the mastermind behind a program called Black Males Working that would gather African American men. It started off just being high school, but eventually she went down to the elementary school level. And every Saturday they met at our church, and they had tutors, Barbara, in science, in German, because my pastor speaks 5 languages. And they would talk every Saturday about etiquette in situations like this. They have been to Dubai. They've been to South Africa. The dream of Rosalind Akins, a story was told on Connections. Before this happened, she said, I declare I'm going to turn that program into a school. And what did she do? She turned it into a school. Carter G. Woodson Academy now resides in the Frederick Douglass High School, all appropriately named, in Lexington, Kentucky, because of one woman's vision. Rosalind Akins herself had come from poverty. She lived in the ghetto in Lexington. The reason why I bring that up is the Carter G. Woodson Academy has served as the prototype for the W.E.B. Du Bois Academy here in Louisville. So telling the stories of people who are taking who are actually doing the intersectionality, who are saying, here's poverty, and here's a solution. And we know that education can be the bridge, the vertical bridge up. It doesn't work for everybody, but for Rosalind Akins, for Hassan Davis, it did. And then finally, I met a young girl when I was on the campaign trail back in 2015, the governor's race. Her name was Rachel. And she was 12 years old, and she was raising money to build an accessible playground. And I said, well, you know, Rachel, how much is this going to cost you? Well, I think it's going to be like $200,000, $300,000. I said, oh, well, good luck with that. Well, Rachel, she didn't need luck. She had a lot more than that. She had some skill as a young adolescent, and she raised $500,000 to build an accessible playground that's not just swings and that kind of thing. It's highly interactive, technology-driven playground. A kid, by the time she was 16, her dream had been realized of making this accessible playground so that no kid would be made to feel like they were different when they were at play. Now, for me, that's really why I do this work, is for the Rachels, for the Rozes, for the Hassans. And it's been my pleasure to share that journey with you as we celebrate 50 years of KET. There's so many more names I could mention, so many places we've been and things that we have done to help elevate our great Commonwealth. But at the end of the day, it always goes back to the people who are doing the work. And KET's blessed to put a highlight on you who's doing the great work. Thank you for having me today, and have a good rest of the afternoon. I moved too fast. Questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, Renee. I'm Leland Woodmansey.
Nice to
Thank
meet
you
you,
for
sir.
being here, and congratulations to KET.
Thank you.
Let's look ahead to the next 50 years of KET. And how is technology changing, and what do you think your functions and your roles may be that will be different?
That is a wonderful question. You know, it's hard to prepare for the technological changes. I think if you have a good infrastructure, human resource infrastructure, which we've been able to manage that enough where we can build on those technological capacities. You know, I don't think even 10 years ago we would have realized how prominent social media and online traffic would have been as a deliverable for content. And we know that people who are Emma's age, they're not watching television. They're watching their smart devices. So actually, we're already getting ahead of that. The videos that I mentioned a little earlier about the workforce videos, they're like 1 minute long. They will be 1 minute long. There's 140 of them. I think that's right, Julie. 140 videos that are 1 minute long, because we know the attention span of younger folks may not go past that much longer. And it gives you just a quick glimpse of what that job would be like. So I think what we're looking at is maybe shorter things. We're always going to have a comment on Kentucky, right? That's been on for going on 40 years. We're always hopefully going to have a Kentucky Tonight. Because our audience, you know, there's a lot of people who are catering to the millennials and younger, but there's very few media outlets that are looking at that 50-year-old up market. And I think that we at KET believe that let's not leave anybody behind. You know, we can really serve that audience very well. And so I think even though you can evolve and do the other deliverables on different platforms, you got to kind of keep the main thing, and don't stray from what made you great to start with. Yes?
Hi, Renee. I'm Fred Cowan, and I admire the work that you've done, as you know, and that
Thank
KET
you.
has
Thank
done
you,
for
sir.
many years. I'm curious about the opioid addiction crisis and what specific things KET has done and maybe
Sure.
thinking about doing to address that.
Sure, that's a great question, and this is one Julie would love to answer as well because she touts our work. We have done, even before the opioid addiction crisis and gotten to the level of notoriety, I hate to use that word, that it is now, KET had started 7 years ago producing programs on a series called Health 360, which took an issue and from 3 different perspectives in 60 minutes. And we were already doing that work back in the early 2010s, right? Because we saw that this was an emerging epidemic. Because meth, remember, before there was meth, there were the pill mills, so we've always had an addiction issue. And so we've always covered it in some capacity. As of late, in the last couple of years, we've actually had these town hall style forums where we've brought in all these different stakeholders to really talk about an issue. So we've completed now 2 of those town hall style forums where, you know, we're talking about physician responsibility, the law enforcement and interdiction piece, where we've talked about what educators and schools should be doing. And then we produced a documentary called Journey to Recovery, and all of this is available on our website. If you go to ket.org, you can watch any of those programs, and it takes a very in-depth